Face-to-face talks between U.S. and Chinese leaders in California yielded agreements on a presidential hotline and fentanyl. President Xi Jinping tells U.S. business leaders China is willing to be friends with America and opposes any types of wars. And the Israeli military releases video showing weapons purportedly found in Gaza's largest hospital. Hello and welcome to TVB News. The highly anticipated in-person talks between President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden was held in California. While some simmering differences remain, the 4-hour meeting saw warm exchanges between the two leaders, with agreements ironed out to step up dialogues encompassing military and AI-related matters. President Xi Jinping arrived at the Filoli Estate, a country house on the outskirts of San Francisco, Wednesday morning, and was welcomed by U.S. President Joe Biden. It's the second get-together of the two leaders since last November in Bali, Indonesia. After handshakes and smiles, the presidents introduced their respective top aides to each other. On the U.S. side, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, among others.
Joe, we're on par still, right?
The Chinese side, Director of the General Office of the Chinese Communist Party Cai Qi and Foreign Minister Wang Yi. During the meeting, President Xi said the Sino-U.S. relationship has not always been smooth sailing, but if both sides insist on respecting each other, they can overcome their differences. More pointedly, Xi said it's not an option for the two major countries to turn their back on each other. It's also unrealistic for one side to change the other, and conflict and confrontation have unbearable consequences for both sides. Xi added he believes the future of Sino-U.S. relations is bright. Biden, meanwhile, said the meeting with Xi was candid, direct, and effective.
We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. And we also have to manage it responsibly, that competition. That's what the United States wants and what we intend to do.
President Biden, how are talks going?
After 2 hours of talk came a working lunch featuring ravioli, artichoke crisps, and roasted chicken. Then the pair took a walk around the property. Light moments too between Xi and Biden. Biden asked Xi to extend his early birthday wishes to the Chinese leader's wife, Peng Liyuan, who will be celebrating next week, the same day as Biden's very own birthday on November 20th. Xi thanked Biden for reminding him because he has been so busy working that he had forgotten the big day is nearing. Xi left the estate after the stroll with a send-off from Biden.
It's a beautiful vehicle.
This is our Hongqi sedan, homemade. Please open and have a look, Xi said.
Oh, it's like that Cadillac we have over there. International meetings, they fly those with me. You know what they call that car? They call it the Beast. Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
And that wrapped up the more than 4 hours of get-together between Xi and Biden. Multiple results and agreements yielded from the talks too. The two leaders agreed to set up a direct presidential hotline, establish dialogues over artificial intelligence, start an intergovernment anti-drug working group with a crackdown on illicit fentanyl production. Also, a resumption of high-level military communications, as well as a further expansion of flights between the two countries early next year. President Xi said China will not take the beaten path of colonialism and plunder, nor the crooked road of hegemony. He said China is not planning to overtake or replace the U.S., and the U.S. should not try to suppress China, stressing that he hopes the U.S. will address Chinese concerns over the export controls, investment scrutiny, and sanctions seriously and have them removed. On the Taiwan issue, Xi said the U.S. should translate their One China principle to actions and stop sending weapons to Taiwan. Biden, meanwhile, said the U.S. does not seek a new Cold War and doesn't support Taiwan independence.
We maintain the agreement that there is a One China policy, and that I'm not going to change that.
Also mentioned were humanitarian concerns over Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong. Biden added both sides will continue high-level exchanges and maintain a communication channel over the next few months. And after his meeting with Joe Biden, President Xi attended a welcome dinner filled with tech giants and business leaders in San Francisco on Wednesday evening. Xi noted China is willing to be friends with America, adding it strongly opposes any types of wars. Sharon Tang reports. After the meeting between Presidents Xi Jinping and Joe Biden, the Chinese leader returned to the city center of San Francisco for a welcome dinner organized by friendly organizations in the United States.
女士们、先生们、朋友们.
Xi began his 30-minute speech by revealing his personal history with the city. When he first visited the U.S. 38 years ago, San Francisco was the first place he went. He added China-U.S. relations dates back to 158 years ago when Chinese workers traveled to the U.S. to help build the first transcontinental railroad connecting the east and west coasts. Both countries worked together to establish the United Nations. During World War II, the U.S. Army also deployed the Flying Tigers Volunteer Air Force Group to assist China in fighting Japan's invasion. With that, Xi said, the foundation of China-U.S. relations was laid by our people.
搭建更多桥梁.
We should build more bridges and pave more roads for people-to-people interactions. We must not erect barriers or create a chilling effect, he said. Meanwhile, Xi stressed that the United States should not see China as its main competitor.
我一直在思考.
I've been thinking, how should we steer the giant ship of China-U.S. relations clear of hidden rocks and shoals, navigated through storms and waves without getting disoriented, losing speed or even having a collision, he said. He went on to say that if one sees the other side as a main competitor, a major geopolitical challenge and a threat, it will only lead to misinformed policymaking, misguided actions and unwanted results. The president noted China never bets against the U.S., never interferes in its internal affairs, and has no intention to challenge or replace the U.S. Xi also stressed that China will not fight a cold war or a hot war with anyone.
中国没有对外侵略扩张的基因.
At any stage of development, China will never pursue hegemony or expansion and will never impose its will on others, he said. The president also announced that China will invite 50,000 young Americans to China on exchange and study programs in the next 5 years. China would also continue the panda protection program with the U.S. to increase exchanges between the two peoples. The banquet was attended by business leaders including Apple CEO Tim Cook and Tesla's boss Elon Musk. A ticket to the banquet reportedly costs up to $40,000 each, which is equivalent to around 310,000 Hong Kong dollars. Sharon Tang, TVB News. Meanwhile, many people in the U.S. said they believe the meeting of President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden demonstrated goodwill from both sides. Some U.S. residents expressed hope the two powers will strengthen dialogue and lower trade restrictions. Timothy Lee reports.
The meeting between President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden resulted in some consensus and agreement between Beijing and Washington. A joint Sino-U.S. anti-drug cooperation is set to be launched. Some San Francisco residents said they hope it could alleviate the city's serious drug problem.
In San Francisco right now, there's a lot of younger generation that taking drug, using drug, and become such a problem everywhere in San Francisco. And I hope if it's true, then it's going to be the problem is going to get better, and I hope they're going to stop drug traffic in the country and try to stop that happen.
With inflation still troubling the U.S., some San Franciscans said they hope Washington can loosen restrictions on exports from China to ease the cost of living. A spokesperson from a U.S. business service firm says she believes the White House will gradually lift sanctions on Chinese goods. Meanwhile, Professor Lau Siu-kai, a consultant at the Chinese Association of Hong Kong and Macau Studies, said the meeting between the two leaders symbolized the country's mutual desire of not wanting to see the relationship further deteriorate.
I think both countries want to stabilize the relationship to prevent further deterioration. The fact that they are willing to talk means that they want to avoid further troubles, and so that the international environment can be stabilized to the benefit of all parties.
But Professor Lau noted the meeting is unlikely to fix the strained relationship between Washington and Hong Kong.
But I am not too optimistic, because with the coming of the U.S. presidential election, it might be possible that U.S.-China relationship will deteriorate again. But at the same time, Hong Kong is going to have the court case of Jimmy Lai, and then we are talking about the local legislation on Article 23 of the Basic Law. All these happenings will prompt American politicians, particularly those who are anti-China, to further attack Hong Kong and maybe impose further sanctions on Hong Kong.
Timothy Lee, TVB News.
And as Israel continues to attack the main hospital in Gaza, condemnation and demonstrations continue. A protest in Washington, D.C. turned violent as U.S. President Joe Biden appeared to support the Israeli attack. David Garrett reports.
The youngest and most vulnerable fighting for life as war swirls around them. These premature babies are oblivious to Israel's raids on Al-Shifa Hospital, which have led to cries of war crimes by many. Pictures from the Hamas-run health ministry show newborns moved away from the fighting. Different shots show staff cowering in corridors as smoke fills the air. They say it is a result of Israeli attacks. The hospital has become a focal point for critics of Israel.
Al-Shifa is a war zone. This is not a hospital anymore. It used to be a hospital. It used to be one of the best hospitals in Gaza, the largest trauma center with some of the best surgeons in the world. And I can attest to that through my Oxford colleagues who will verify that. And now it is an absolute graveyard.
The Israel Defense Force continue to encircle and raid the medical facility. They claim Hamas uses hospitals as cover and set up a command center, but showed no evidence of tunnels or any center as they release footage from Al-Shifa.
So we're inside the MRI center of the Shifa Hospital. Israeli troops breached here a few hours ago.
The military spokesman takes us on a tour showing off captured weapons which he claims would be used against Israel. The footage shows AK-47 rifles, ammunition and grenades.
This is what they found. These weapons have absolutely no business being inside a hospital. The only reason they're here is because Hamas put them here.
Protesters in the US clashed with police at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C. Police said 6 officers were injured. Officials had to be evacuated. Demonstrators blamed law enforcement for the violence. The message coming from the White House is mixed. Some Americans think Joe Biden approves of Israel's presence at Al-Shifa.
You have a circumstance where the first war crime is being committed by Hamas by having their headquarters, their military, hidden under a hospital. And that's a fact. That's what's happened. Israel did not go in with large number of troops, did not raid, did not rush everything down. They've gone in, and they've gone in with their soldiers carrying weapons, their guns.
Other leaders are more direct. Turkey's president, in a speech to party members, called Israel a terrorist state setting out to destroy Gaza. Recep Tayyip Erdogan received a resounding round of applause. David Garrett, TVB News.
A UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for urgent and extended humanitarian pauses in the Israel-Hamas conflict. The proposal won the support of 12 of the 15 members. Britain, Russia, and the United States abstained. Sponsored by Malta, the latest draft watered down some of the language. It changed demands to calls for humanitarian pauses, as well as asking for the immediate release of hostages held by Hamas. 4 previous attempts at the resolution had failed. Israel's ambassador to the UN said it had no meaning and called it disconnected from reality. UN resolutions are in theory legally binding and are often ignored. However, the U.S. did not use its veto, which suggests it could put pressure on Israel to comply. A vehicle crashed into a barrier outside the Israeli embassy in Tokyo. A police officer was injured and a 53-year-old man was arrested. A damaged black van was seen near the building. Investigators cordoned off the area and were moving around the crash site. No motive has been revealed, but broadcaster NHK says the driver was affiliated to a right-wing group. The area has seen a handful of protests since the Israel-Hamas war started last month. The barricade that the car crashed into has only been in place for some time. Residents say there has been an increased security presence in recent weeks. French judges have issued arrest warrants for Syria President Bashar al-Assad, his brother Maher al-Assad, and 2 other senior officials over the use of banned chemical weapons against civilians in Syria. The arrest warrants refer to charges of complicity in crimes against humanity and complicity in war crimes. This comes after a criminal investigation into chemical attacks in the town of Duma and the district of Eastern Ghouta in August 2013. The attacks killed over 1,000 people. Assad's forces responded to protests that began in 2011 with a brutal crackdown, which United Nations experts argue amounts to war crimes. Syria denies using chemical weapons. Arrest warrants for sitting heads of state are rare, as they generally enjoy immunity from prosecution. But there are exceptions when accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity or genocide. Still ahead. The UK Prime Minister says he would pass an emergency law after suffering a defeat in the top court over a plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Police arrest more than 30 people on suspicion of illegal use of electric mobility devices. And the city's jobless rate up slightly at 2.9%. Welcome back. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said he would pass an emergency law that warned that the UK could quit the European Convention on Human Rights after top judges ruled a plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda was unlawful. Daniel Rao tells us more.
In a major blow to one of Rishi Sunak's key policies, Britain's top court ruled that asylum seekers sent to Rwanda would be at real risk of ill treatment because they could be returned to the conflict-racked home countries they'd fled. In response, the UK Prime Minister said he was working on a new treaty with Rwanda and striving to bring in an urgent law to declare the East African nation a safe destination for migrants.
We have prepared for all outcomes of this case. And so we have been working on a new international treaty with Rwanda. This will provide a guarantee in law that those who are relocated from the UK to Rwanda will be protected against removal from Rwanda. And it will make clear that we will bring back anyone if ordered to do so by a court. So I'm also announcing today that we will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe. It will ensure that people cannot further delay flights by bringing systemic challenges in our domestic courts and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked.
The Rwanda scheme, originally drawn up by former Prime Minister Boris Johnson in an initial £140 million deal, is the central plank of Sunak's immigration policy. It aims to address rising concern among some voters about the numbers of asylum seekers from Europe ahead of a general election that must be held next year. Under the scheme, Britain intended to send tens of thousands of asylum seekers who arrived on its shores without permission to Rwanda in a bid to deter large numbers of migrants crossing the channel from Europe in small boats. The first planned flight to Rwanda was blocked last June after the European Court of Human Rights granted a temporary injunction to a small number of asylum seekers. Sunak also signalled Britain could potentially leave the European Convention on Human Rights. This year, more than 27,000 people have arrived on the southern English coast without permission, after a record 45,755 were detected in 2022. Meanwhile, the cost of housing the 175,000 migrants awaiting an asylum decision is costing £8 million a day. Dunarel, TV News.
Police arrested 33 people in Taipo, Shengshui and Tumun on suspicion of illegal use of electric mobility devices. One of them, a woman, was also apprehended over alleged dangerous driving. Police said the 47-year-old woman drove an electric bike along a bustling sidewalk with a 4-year-old child on the passenger seat. The 33 suspects aged between 24 and 70 were taken away on suspicion of driving an unlicensed vehicle, using a motor vehicle without third-party insurance or without a protective helmet. The government rolled out a 1-year pilot scheme in March, allowing people to ride registered and licensed electric bikes and scooters along the cycle tracks from around University Station to Pak Shek Kok. The police reiterated that these electric-powered devices are banned in other places. Hong Kong's latest jobless rate edged up slightly to 2.9% during the 3-month period ending in October. That's 0.1 percentage point higher than the figure from the July to September period. Sectors that saw a notable rise in unemployment included manufacturing, import-export trade, and wholesale. The underemployment rate remained unchanged at 1%. The total number of employed persons fell 6,900 to about 3.72 million. Secretary for Labour Chris Sun said inbound tourism and local consumption would continue to underpin economic growth in the short term. He added the labour market should remain tight in the coming months, despite some negative effects stemming from the difficult external environment. And that's the news. Thank you for watching.